Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Uncovering Cross-Cultural Identities, Early Modern Lacquered, Luso-Asian Objects in the ACM Collection. Our speaker tonight is Dr. Ulrike Körber. Dr. Körber is currently a research fellow at the Asian Civilisations Museum. She's also a decorative arts conservator and art historian based in Lisbon, Portugal. She has been studying Asian lacquer for over 15 years with a particular focus on interactions between Europe and Asia. Her current focus on Luso-Asian lacquerwares, particularly commissions from European Catholics, was stimulated by objects she encountered in 2007 during a project in Lisbon. Her PhD thesis, The Journey of Artifacts, the Study and Characterization of a Nucleus of Lacquered Luso-Asian Objects from the 16th and 17th centuries from 2019, examined a group of lacquered parade shields, portable furniture, and religious items that emerged as a result of Portuguese presence in Asia. Please welcome Dr. Ulrike Körber.
Hello, everybody, and many thanks for coming. Some years ago, I applied for this research fellowship, and everybody remembers what happened in between. So with this big delay, I'm all the more happier that I was still welcome to come to the ACM. Now, I want to introduce you with a fascinating group of objects I first came across these curious 16th and 17th century lacquered Luso-Asian items during conservation projects, and I soon understood that the search of their geographical and cultural origin has been puzzling different scholars. Then it became my own research. The prefix Luso derives from the ancient Roman province of Lusitania on the Iberian Peninsula that covered the territory of today's Portugal. By Luso-Asian, I refer to artifacts related to the European presence along the Asian coastline and the scope of the Portuguese ventures and Catholic missions. This presence resulted in objects featuring exceptionally diverse cultural and artistic influences, including European or Christian typologies, manufacture in one locale and decoration elsewhere. For such multiple geographical origins and craft contributions, the term Luso-Asian seems to fit best. Under the Portuguese crown, Catholic European presence in Asia linked varied ports of South, Southeast, and East Asia via the Luso-Asian networks and maritime trading routes, commercial ventures, diplomatic relations, and missionary work. On various levels resulted manifold circulations that promoted exchange and mutual influences in the scope of European, Asian, and interregional encounters. Indigenous crafts adapted to foreign tastes and needs, heterogeneous artifacts, and new artistic styles emerged that well illustrate cultural, religious, and artistic intermingling, characteristic of that period. All portable objects, they include parade shields, various types of furniture, and religious items such as mass book lecterns or oratories. They largely copy the typologies used on the Iberian Peninsula, as well as various carpentry traditions. Several have intricately carved structures of tropical hardwood, and all are lacquered and embellished with motifs in gold on red or black backgrounds. The decorations generally mingle Chinese auspicious motifs with European themes, such as coat of arms or Christian subjects. My research was inspired by the inconsistent characteristics of the artifact's physical features with their classification, which attempted to identify a single place of manufacture for each. This resulted in individual attributions to India, Southeast Asia, China, Japan, the Ryukyu Kingdom, and even various places in Europe. Yet discrepancies between their wooden structures and lacquer embellishments called for a deeper inquiry that would combine formal analysis with historical contextualization and technical investigation of the lacquer coatings. The core group includes 4 pieces now in Austria, recorded in inventories of Habsburg royal collections of the late 16th and early 17th century. They reached Europe as diplomatic or souvenir gifts, perhaps brought by Portuguese officers or agents, and mark an approximate date of manufacture for the other related items. I will first give you an introduction into Asian lacquer, a material not everybody might be familiar with. With a millennia-old history, Asian lacquer is the viscous and sometimes milky sap tapped from the bark of certain trees that grow over a large area of Southeast and East Asia. A complex organic material with peculiar properties, it has been used as glue and as a protective or decorative coating due to its ability to polymerize into a stable, durable film and its resistance against water, acids, and alkaline. This includes multi-layered applications, each of which requires time to cure, a complex, lengthy process consisting of many different steps that may involve several individuals. A variety of decorative options can produce impressive artifacts. Across Asia, unique lacquer craft traditions have developed and interacted over centuries. Chemically a water and oil emulsion, the lacquer sap's main components are catechol and derivatives, generally dubbed urushiol, lacquol, and thitziol, which can be distinguished using scientific analysis. The sap of Toxicodendron venicifluum, native to China, Korea, and Japan, contains urushiol. The sap of Toxicodendron succedanea, that occurs mainly in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and southern China, contains lacquol. The sap of Melanohoria usitata, native to the Southeast Asian regions of today's Myanmar and Thailand, contains thitziol. For not being too technical, this slide shows only an overview of the methodology applied to the lacquer samples. The technical study aimed to distinguish lacquer type and detect inorganic and organic materials mixed in lacquer formulations. Identifying precise formulations, assessing layer sequence, and classifying decorative techniques allowed the attribution to specific lacquer traditions. Results generally revealed ground layers composed of iron-rich clay mixed with drying oil, such as tung or perilla, and protein, often identified as blood. The lacquer coatings mainly consisted of lacquer lacquer, mixed with drying oil, with urushi present in only a few finishing or bowl layers. Yet whatever the typology, wood type, or carpentry tradition, secular or religious use, all specimens share the same Chinese characteristics in their lacquer coatings. Decorative techniques using gold leaf or shell gold combined with needle drawing on red or black backgrounds were the most common, but incised gilded lines, mother-of-pearl application, and oil litharge painting also appear. All are typical of traditional Chinese conventions and appear mentioned in the 16th century Ming Chinese treatise on lacquer, Xiuxi Lu, thus presenting contemporary craft traditions. This treatise also mentions the differences in quality and the use of simplified techniques and substitute materials, such as pig's blood or drying oil, that were practiced by Chinese artisans on inferior objects for everyday use. And indeed, with some exceptions, common to all specimens are layer structures and compositions indicative of cheaper and faster production methods. Because single items can only be understood in view of the entire group, I want to share some of the striking results that revise our understanding of the commission and circulation of these artifacts. Heterogeneous creations combining craft contributions and stylistic influences of multiple cultural and geographical spheres. For example, it revealed objects that mingle completely different lacquer traditions, as for example these two Indian-type leather-covered wooden shields. The rayskin shield from Vienna, for instance, has a front covered with lacquered and polished rayskin, a typical Japanese technique mainly applied to arms and armor, and the reverse coated with Chinese lacquer, decorated with auspicious motifs. It seems it results from a special commission destined as a gift to a special individual, reflecting the far-flung Portuguese trading network with access to all kinds of exotic materials and crafts. The Amsterdam shield's black coating is entirely of Southeast Asian Thitsi lacquer, in a typical layer sequence, following the tradition of the ancient kingdoms of today's Myanmar. But its gold leaf decoration affixed with a pigmented lacquer or rushi mixture displays motifs and method clearly Chinese. Interesting, it depicts a Portuguese shield holder. Oops. Here. Yeah. Analysis results also revealed that some coatings combine Southeast Asian lacquer. A lacquer Thitsi mixed was identified in both the so-called Pope's Trunk in Vienna and a Jesuit carved and gilded oratory. Just as with the Japanese Namban lacquers, where Thitsi already has been detected, this presence of Southeast Asian sap illustrates the extent of networking and exchange of goods within Asia at that time, and that Chinese artisans also used this imported and cheaper sap. Suggesting the circulation of objects among Catholic missions, this polygonal teak wood oratory, now missing its dome, once housed a religious figure typical of liturgical artifacts produced for the Catholic missions in India. The gilded surfaces of its richly carved segmented doors feature the Jesuit monogram and the intertwined letters A and M for Auspicious Maria. Their black lacquered interiors retain traces of Chinese Namban-style ornamentation, foliage in gold leaf, and vestiges of a decorative band of lozenges of shell etched by a double line of gold. Artifacts that linked to the Catholic missions of the Society of Jesus proved fruitful sources, as they are easily attributable to a certain time frame, geographical area, and historical context. Striking is their combination of mother of pearl and motifs in gold, presenting black surfaces profusely filled with plant and animal motifs. Because they resemble the characteristic decorative scheme of Japanese Namban lacquerware, many are still classified as such. The newly founded Society of Jesus arrived in India in 1542 and soon became the most active Catholic congregation in Asia. It reached Japan in 1549, where it monopolized missionary work until 1593. In the mid-16th century, Macau became the most lucrative center of Portuguese trade between China and Japan, Jesuit headquarters of both missions, and a place of interest for other missionaries. Across this vast region, numerous Jesuit missions educated Indian, Japanese, Chinese, European, and other students and trained missionaries for their work. Far from Europe and the established industry for devotional items in Goa and other Portuguese settlements in India, missionaries in East Asia required all kinds of furniture, imagery, and religious utensils. Records and several objects attest that they sated the increasing demand also with works from India. Embroidered silk textiles, porcelain, sculptured ivory sands, enclosed in wooden oratories circulated among missions in India, Japan, and China. 16th and 17th century Christian art produced in Asia echoes the distinctive backgrounds of the hosting cultures. Above all, the Jesuits tailored their evangelization to the societies they wished to convert, taking advantage of compatible imagery and conventions already present. By borrowing symbols from local beliefs, they established connections between domestic and Christian imagery to express their optimistic message of salvation, resulting in a combined visual vocabulary. In India, church fittings, altar pieces, and devotional items display intricately carved surfaces. In Japan and China, they adapted lacquered traditions closely associated with spiritual beliefs and rituals since antiquity. When referring to Japanese namban decorations, I focus on the diverse kinds of portable receptacles and numerous liturgical items manufactured specially for the Jesuit mission on the Japanese archipelago, such as pyxes, mass book lecterns, reliquaries, or oratories. The impressive number of existing namban pieces embellished with the Jesuits' emblem illustrate the need of utilizing objects to spread their faith. Many of these pieces survive in Iberian or New Spanish churches, monasteries, or convents, and in museum and private collections around the world, attesting to the extent of the Jesuit network. Their European or Christian shape and namban lacquer coatings distinguish them from domestic kodaiji makie decorations, practiced by contemporary Japanese lacquer artisans. These include common decorative scenes with autumn grasses and seasonal plants drawn freehand, depicted in flat gold or silver makie nashiji, against a spacious black background, as seen on the right side of the present slide. There. In contrast to the Japanese domestic wear, namban lacquer pieces commissioned by the Catholic Europeans feature black surfaces completely covered with these contrasting flora and fauna motifs in 3 different hues: gold and silver makie and mother of pearl. Sections are framed by a variety of single or multiple decorative bands. But the opulent use of mother of pearl does not correspond to the Japanese aesthetics. This new exotic style may derive from the quiet European taste through influences of Korean or Thai lacquer art, or Portuguese commissions of mother of pearl pieces from the Indian Gujarat. Yet techniques and motifs were traditional Japanese and derived from the style developed in Kyoto. Here, these were adapted to the Catholic European preference. What at first glance resembles namban lacquer, on closer inspection is actually very different in formal and technical details. While namban formulations feature urushi lacquer, sometimes combined with the cheaper Southeast Asian thitsi lacquer and never lacquered lacquer, namban style or Luso-Asian compositions employ only rarely urushi and mainly lacquered lacquer, occasionally mixed with thitsi. Despite of several differences, namban foundations never consist of blood, while namban style ground layers never contain any lacquer sap. Namban decorations combine 3 contrasting hues of flat gold and silver makie with mainly abalone shell on black backgrounds, but never use gold leaf. Luso-Asian namban style decorations showcase on red or black backgrounds motifs of gold leaf or shell gold or lacquer painting, combined with fragments of green turban shell. Obviously, namban liturgical items circulated within Luso-Asian and Jesuit networks inspired the lacquering of religious items used in Macau and perhaps the China mission. But for their Jesuit clients, Chinese craftsmen clearly employed simpler and faster technologies, using their own materials and stylistically adjusting a variety of local auspicious designs to the Japanese namban models. 1,000 Chinese namban-style decorations feature various combinations, either gold leaf painting and shell application, a combination of gold leaf, mother of pearl, and red lacquer, gold leaf combined only with red lacquer, or gold decoration using shell gold combined with mother of pearl. Surfaces are framed by very different but also manifold varieties of decorative bands of straight or wavy gold lines with spirals or stylized flowers. These assorted combinations may indicate distinct time frames, locations, workshops, or even an evolution of style. After introducing this curious group, let's focus on the pieces that have been acquired by the ACM over the past decade. Currently on display in the Court and Company Gallery are the large writing chest and a smaller Southeast Asian lacquered writing box. In the Christian Art Gallery are a smaller Indo-Portuguese carved mass book lectern with traces of lacquer and a Namban-style lectern. In the same gallery is displayed also a Japanese Namban hanging oratory with an enclosed oil painting like those produced in the Jesuit painting seminary that left Nagasaki after the ban of Christianity in 1614 to continue in Macau. The Namban-style lectern shows the Jesuit monogram on a background of 6 pointed stars in gold leaf and mother of pearl. It depicts auspicious motifs of bamboo, flowering plum, and peach branches, magpies and squirrels. Framing the 4 corner quadrants are decorative bands of lozenges of shell within gold lines, matching those in the oratory mentioned earlier. Identical decorative bands appear on several Jesuit mass book lecterns, probably copied by Chinese or mixed-race artisans after circulating models. Decorated in the same Namban mimicking style, these display plain hardwood boards and a different construction from typical Namban lecterns. Auspicious groupings, like flying magpies among flowering plum, frequently appear on such Namban-style religious pieces mingled with others that carry Christian symbolism. To the Chinese, a promising message indicating the arrival of happiness. In Christian iconography, the plum is considered a symbol of fidelity. It seems no coincidence that such double-meaning icons adorn liturgical objects. This lectern's lacquer coating has already been analyzed by conservation scientist Lin Schur and conservator Dr. Körber at the Heritage Conservation Center. The results match the techniques and compositions commonly identified in this kind of Luso-Asian objects. In disastrous condition, this lectern was rescued from the rubble of a Lisbon construction site decades ago. Again, it has borders of lozenges of shell, and its overall decoration resembles the decoration on the oratory and the ACM lectern. But while the latter limits the color palette to gold leaf and shell application, this specimen includes red lacquer in a 3-use scheme characteristic of Namban decorations. Its exposed wooden surface reveals a hint to the region of its likely origin or use, a Chinese inscription. If this were not exciting enough, the characters include the name Ao Men, the Chinese term for the territory that since the 17th century Europeans have known as Macau. The principal item of my research stay at the ACM was this outstanding shrine acquired in 2019 that is not yet on display. The study included technical analysis of its lacquer coating in collaboration, again with Lin Schur and Dr. Körber at the HCC. It combines all the characteristics of these Luso-Asian religious items. Its architectonical structure corresponds to that of Mannerist altars and implements in 16th and 17th century Christian churches in Europe and Portuguese India. But in contrast to comparable Jesuit items, it depicts the emblem of the Augustinians, a crowned double-headed eagle with a flaming heart pierced with arrows. The exterior features elaborate carving work on the pediment and the predella, and in the interior it is equipped with a niche flanked by double columns that support a semicircular arch. This interior space once housed a religious sculpture, like the Virgin or the Virgin and Child, now missing, as is the case with other Indo-Portuguese altar pieces or oratories. When I previously said that all pieces are portable, I have been surprised by its exceptional size that totally exceeded my expectations. In comparison, you can see some of the portable oratories and their relative sizes on the lower right. And right above, the remains of lacquer and gold decoration on the extant original iron hinge. Many objects of Indian wood structures have traces of lacquer on their metal fittings. This is another indication of the circulation of objects which assembled in one locale have been completely lacquered over in another, where they were intended to be used. Its exceptional size and the presence of an inventory number suggest it has been used in an institutional context, equipping a chapel or church. And indeed, in 1589, Spanish Augustinian friars from the Philippines founded the monastery of St. Augustine in Macau. As a Portuguese enclave, they wanted to ensure their exclusive access to Chinese goods. Thus, these Spanish friars later have been substituted by Portuguese Augustinians. But also its intricate decoration in the carved areas is remarkable. In comparable portable items like chests or oratories, the carvings usually are completely gilded. But here, single elements are decorated with distinct textures in gold leaf, a striking decoration previously unseen within this object group. Here, the carvings stand out against the black background with gilded dots of two sizes. The same dotted background is present on two other chests, again as a background for carved decoration in the Pope's trunk in Vienna, both on the exterior carcass sides and in the circular cartouche in the lid's interior, and in the chest from the National Palace of Sintra on the flat lid's interior. The shrine also shares some of the typical decorative friezes present on a variety of Luso-Asian objects. For example, the wavy border with spirals is on the lid's interior of the writing chest in the exhibition. Both the wavy border with spirals and the frieze of consecutive spirals with dots is present again on the Pope's trunk in Vienna. And even though not a Jesuit commission, but destined to the order of St. Augustine, this oratory again displays Namban-style decoration on its exterior carcass sides and doors. Though very much worn, Chinese auspicious flora and fauna motifs of tree peony, flowering plum, magpies, pheasants, peacocks, or dogs are still visible, here in a combination of gold leaf and red lacquer painting. Surprisingly, and in contrast to its rich and virtuous decoration, the coating consists of only one single body lacquer layer. The analysis revealed typical compositions of a ground layer of clay mixed in drying oil and blood on the flat interior sides, with a thin black pigmented layer and a layer of lacquer mixed with drying oil. As an example, you can see the cross-section of the red lacquer painting on the right, in visible and blue light. This shrine raises new questions and adds to the wider phenomenon of these pieces. It seems the distinct religious orders collaborated and might have used the same contacts to order the lacquering of liturgical objects. The writing chest is richly carved with vegetal scroll work and animals in a manner that points to the Indian coast or Ceylon. The exterior side, in comparably bad condition, originally have been all covered with gold leaf. The richly decorated interior of the chest slit display among typical auspicious motifs of tree peonies, magpies, hares, phoenixes or clouds, a sun, and a pair of lions. Unusual motifs in Chinese art, the sun is symbol of the sovereign upon earth, the masculine principle in nature, and the source of all brightness. In Christian iconography, it is undoubtedly related with Christ. The lion, not indigenous to China, was admired for its strength and courage, is a symbol of Buddhism and seen as a protector or guardian. In Christian art, again, it is a symbol of Christ and associated with resurrection. So where have these pieces been lacquered then? Historical circumstances and the results indeed point to Macau. Portuguese enclave, an exclusive port on the Chinese coast, with restricted access to the Canton fairs and mainland China. Important stopover for the Black Ship between Goa and Nagasaki, and the Jesuit strategic center from the late 1560s onward, that was strongly interlinked with the Japanese mission. Jesuit institutions trained students of various backgrounds, and Christians who fled Japan between 1614 and 1639 found refuge. In Macau, the Jesuit painting seminary from Nagasaki resumed training students in the copying of European religious paintings. The close link to Nagasaki via maritime trade provided opportunity for the exchange of know-how and aesthetic conventions. Their commission and production probably involved Japanese refugees that may have included craftsmen. The question of Macau as the locale of lacquer manufacture remains unsolved. There are no records mentioning such production. Historical descriptions by European visitors often note that no products were manufactured within the city limits and that everything came from Canton. But solid, if circumstantial, technical and historical context suggests some concrete role. Whether in commissioning of objects, the social mingling of artisans and refugees, and Macau's position as the nerve center of Jesuit presence in East Asia. These Luso-Asian religious items distill the transcultural mingling characteristic of the period that Namban screens vividly portray. The spread of people, the exchange and transmission of commodities and objects, the distribution and trafficking of materials and techniques, and the dissemination of motifs. With all these fascinating results and individual journeys, these pieces can be understood as foreign, European, or Christian commissions, but they do not yet derive from an export production designed for Europe. Obviously, their extreme individuality indicates single or small group orders mainly employed locally, either by individuals who also needed to equip their daily lives, or by the religious orders. Occasionally exchanged within the missions, they were distributed among Asia, reached Europe as gifts or souvenirs, or returned together with their owners. As singular as their assemblage is their geopolitical conjuncture and pivotal place in world history. These items contributed to the evolving European taste and presaged demand for exotic embellishments in the following centuries, and predicated from the late 17th century onward the organized export production established in the exclusive Chinese Foreign Trade Center of Canton. Though generally neglected or considered of no great artistic value, Luso-Asian lacquers perfectly document a period of scarce concrete knowledge and limited documental evidence. As messengers of the past, they deserve appropriate appreciation and preservation. Resulting from cross-cultural interaction, circulation, and exchange, they have much in common with Singapore itself. And moreover, without doubt, these items have at least once, if not twice, passed the Malacca Straits Highway about 450 or 400 years ago, making the Asian Civilization Museum, in my opinion, a perfect place to house them and to tell their story. Finally, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to come here and for the kind support I received by the ACM, the HCC, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ulrike, for your most insightful and fascinating talk. The floor is now open for any questions you might have. Yes.
I don't know if you can answer that, but maybe other people can. I'm curious about what was in the writing chest. I mean, what were the utensils in a writing chest at the time?
I think old type of utensils like our paper or correspondence, like different things. And you could also use I mean, there are different varieties of these writing chests. Usually you have this front flap, but then you also have, you also have drawers, different, so there are different designs of these, but they also must have functioned as a plotting pad. And usually these parts of these furnitures are always worn. So, or it's very rarely that you really have extant lacquer in a good condition.
And would you be carrying ink, for instance, along, or would the ink be done locally? Is that known?
I don't know, but probably yes, in a appropriate container.
And the quills and stuff like that, I imagine.
I think so, yes. But imagine there was at that time that did not exist the kind of furniture we use now, and it was also much more portable and always in chest shapes.
A lot of the writing implements would also have their own, like a pen holder or ink
an
bottle.
own case.
And some of these implements would also be, I guess, parked under one of those drawers. You will have papers, I guess, envelopes as well. There is also the possibility of like wax stamps as well to be used. So it's basically a writing stationery box.
Yeah, stationery, but you could also store like a leather thing with money or whatever was precious, and many times you could lock, they have a lock, so you can lock them.
So thank you, Ulrike. I have a question about archive. Do you have any, because I think you are depicting trajectories and movement, and can we have some archival material about the circulation of either the raw material or the activity, or so I'm curious about that. Did you figure out some?
I don't know what you mean. What
I'm
activity?
thinking of the work that has been done, I think by Arlen, or many years ago, and he was looking at the list of ingredient items, raw materials within boats.
No,
so tracing and tracking this sort of. So comforting some of the hypotheses of where it could have been done. So it's a reason why I'm...
Many things, like also the tsitsi lacquer, the Southeast Asian lacquer, was a trade good. So it was either Chinese or Portuguese or maybe even Japanese, bought it in Ayutthaya in Thailand or in Thai ports, and might also have bought it in Pegu or in Myanmar, in ancient kingdoms of Myanmar. So even like also wood, wood species, wood types, that there were so many things already circulating that if you only analyze the wood alone, you can't tell, oh, it's teak, it must be Indian, although it could also be from Myanmar or from other places.
It was more cross-linking some information from the materiality. Okay, I understand what you are, and I think it's super interesting to see that it's not so simple. It's traveling, it's used,
very complex.
But I was wondering, do we have records of, in this boat there was such and such, and then you can potentially trace when it's,
That's more complicated. Yes, of course there are records, but then there was in Lisbon the earthquake in 1755, and the Casa da India, which was the big archive of a lot of shipments and lists, just went. So that's very difficult. Now we have those VOC documents where you have lots of information, but that's later, and also not using always the same trajectories. And but then there was another thing, because every person that went on a trip on the Black Ship, for example, could use, now I don't remember the name in English, but could use like a big box and put in there whatever the person wanted to put. So there are also many things that went undocumented. Like it was a kind of free, how you say that? Free fraud? free luggage. Yes. So it's very, very complex, and because there were also unofficial ways. So yes, there was so much going on that we can't imagine nowadays, I think.
I mean, just on that note, the complexity is a big headache because some records were lost, like the Lisbon one. I mean, then there are also some very fragmentary mentioning based on the Jesuit archives in Rome. So some of the letters mention certain priests partake in commissioning of these lacquers. They give very careful instructions on how do you pack them in a ship. How would it survive? Have to be careful with like water, despite they're waterproof. So they're very careful mentioning of this in certain archives. But then they also talk very specific about one thing. And then there's also the other kind of research that you go into, I guess, archaeological research, like the findings from that temple. I think it was in Kyoto, the Buddhist temple in Kyoto, where they found like the tsitsi lacquer, like pots of tsitsi lacquer that was buried. And we also know from the Japanese archive, from the different houses, that they're really complaining that by the demand for Japanese lacquer is so high that they cannot match the reaping or the harvesting of the urushi lacquer. So what they have to do is to buy raw lacquer from other places in Southeast Asia and to bring it in. So it is also imaginable that some of these export lacquer, instead of using the urushi lacquer, which is so dear to them, the export one, they might even mix it up and it's a cheaper production, but we still sell it at very
because the
high
client
cost.
doesn't know.
Exactly, the client doesn't know.
In Lisbon is one bed that is Namban decorated, really, but has only tsitsi lacquer. So very interesting.
So there is also that layer that, maybe what Ulrike was saying, that, these could be made in Macau, but there is also the other possibility for certain, probably not the one that ACM acquired, but probably other classification objects that were made in Japan, probably by Japanese lacquered artists, but they're using, a species that is non-Japanese lacquer. So it's really, I guess, complicated.
Yes, but in this thing, it's always really good to identify the technique and the formulations that are used, because they are really specific to certain places. Like I said, the differences between Namban style and real Namban. In Japanese Namban lacquer, you never have gold leaf, never. So there are certain things that they're reliable. But then also, again, of course, I forgot to mention the Jesuit correspondence, which is huge and large, and they wrote so much and copied everything 100 times. And there are annual letters between the missions or back to Europe, and there are records that they ordered certain supplies or things from Japan or from Macau or from Goa, and back and forth they were transferred or exchanged like every day normal goods, even like wine or olives, but also sometimes appear like missal stands or oratories or several items used in the mission. Yeah, and devotional items. And what I think is that in Japan there was this big production already running. The Jesuits had a difficulty, or it took them so much more time to settle in China. So first they found out they can't be like monks, because then they are not accepted. They had to study Confucianism, they had to study the language and everything. They were growing beards to be accepted by the literati, and they adjusted their religious scripture to Chinese conventions. So it was a whole thing of adaptation that took decades. So, and And then there was also a difference between Macau as an enclave and the mainland China. And there were, like, Macau was not well seen, but somehow they needed objects to sell their religion. And without already established places and being accepted, and you have to get it from somewhere, so they got it from Japan or from India. Of course, some certain things might have been even produced in Macau or in the surroundings, but it's still a vague thing. But there are many facts actually pointing to this region, at least. Please.
Okay. Not this slide, but there was one where you showed Christian symbols that were reproduced. I think you had, looked like it might have been a pelican on the top. And then obviously the IHS. What?
Wait.
I think it might have been, it doesn't.
This, maybe?
Yes, with Christian symbols, yeah. So is that a pelican on the top, on the left, on the top?
That's a tabletop. A foldable,
Oh,
foldable
no, I mean
tabletop.
the symbol. Is that a pelican?
Oh, no, it's a pelican.
It is.
Yes.
And the one on the bottom.
Characteristic symbol.
Yeah,
Yes.
that one I agree was probably intentionally a Christian symbol. But when you mention the plum and whatever that bird is on the bottom, is that a magpie?
Yes.
Yeah. You didn't say the magpie was a Christian was conveyed the Christian connotation, but you did say the plum might have been.
No, I just said that it's a big possibility that certain symbols have double meaning for both. They're readable by the people to be converted. That's why also they used lacquer. It's also an adaptation to the local culture, to use a material to cover the religious items that is familiar to
I
the
guess my
people.
question is, IHS is definitely intentional as a Christian symbol, but do you think that the Japanese or whoever was making this intentionally used the magpie and the plum because it had a connotation, or was that just something that they were used to?
I actually think that the Jesuits, especially the Jesuits, had influence and they studied all the things and they were already familiar with Chinese conventions and culture and iconography. And I think that in some cases they might have intentionally ordered certain motifs
Plants or
that are auspicious
Fauna,
for
flora, they would have.
Yes.
Yeah. Or do you think it's just that's what they made?
It can be a big coincidence, but it might not be.
Well, the problem with it is the Jesuits are very meticulous in the way that they document every single detail, and even to the point of picking certain motifs. So there is that possibility. We don't know, or it could also gone to the convention of what I guess the lacquer artist would also counter-propose. So there is that level of negotiation that sometimes, especially for the more generic flora and fauna that we aren't exactly sure.
The more Japanese or the more Asian.
But in this case, it's all Chinese.
Or who knows? Maybe you see that so many of these, whatever we're going to call them, these birds, magpies or whatever, could also be a sort of a loose interface with like the doves coming in. So there is all this, I guess, parallel meanings that they are playing with.
And I have to say that there are also occasionally some objects where it really seems to be on purpose. Like the choice of certain elements. Like, for example, there's one lectern in Buenos Aires with the St. Michael. And it has like those cartouches in the corner. And there is the Chinese chestnut, which is also which I think has a symbolic that is against evil. I can't express it now right, but it has a certain connotation that it is against evil. So it fits completely well with the story of Saint Michael. So it's curious, but it's the whole group, or the more pieces are studied or seen, because every additional piece adds something. Oops, adds something to the whole story. That's very interesting.
It's just a comment, and something, I don't know, but I think what is fascinating is the fact that it doesn't have to be intended to be adopted. I think at one point, meeting is that you pick what fits you. So but it doesn't have to be conscious.
So I just always wonder, making that assumption that, ascribing a Christian meaning to something that might not have necessarily been meant to have, like on the oratory that we have, it looks like cherry blossoms. They probably did cherry blossoms and maples all the time on.
Yes, of course, it's frequent. But Patricia, maybe you agree, the sun, like the sun on the chest lid's interior, it's definitely a Christian symbol on purpose.
I just wonder about if you're really grasping at meaning and when you're looking at some of the flora and fauna that is not really obscure.
Well, I do have one question for you, Ulrike. I think in your talk you emphasize a distinction between the place of manufacture and the place in which lacquer work was done, and as well you emphasize the portability of all these objects, further accelerating their circulation and movement. I wonder in the technical examination you've done on these objects if there is an instance of more than one instance of lacquer work being done, and over different periods of time. So if someone was to own a lectern, for example, and the lectern work was, and the lacquer work was done in Macau, for example, do your technical studies show another layer of lacquer work done in another place, but at a different point of time?
I could have shown much more curious things, because there is a little writing box, like in the collection, that has, you see a Chinese or this kind of Chinese red with gold motifs decoration, but then on there are some missing parts, and you see a Southeast Asian tsitsi lacquer coating underneath. So it must have traveled with the owner, or it was inherited, or I don't know what happened, but it was lacquered once in one place, and then somewhere in southern China it was or over lacquered, or lacquered over. And yeah, there are so many curious things, and these curious examples add to understand the whole group, because it's not an easy. It's like, wow, what's that phenomenon?
Yeah, I think which further really adds to the complexity of an object's lifespan, and I think really roots the kind of interdisciplinary work that you do in looking and analyzing objects. So thank you so much, Dr. Ulrike. Yes, sorry.
Sorry, just wanted to say one more thing, that the curious thing about these Namban style pieces is that many have been bought from Japan, from Portuguese collections or collections in Europe, because they were seen or understood as Namban pieces, but they're not. And that's also very curious. That was all. Thank you.
And we have time for one last question, if there are any other questions. If not, thank you for your time. And I just have a few announcements to make. So thank you so much again, Ulrike, for this fascinating talk that has really illuminated our understanding of not just ACM objects, but other kinds of objects that are in other collections and circulating globally. As well, a little plug for tomorrow's Friday with Friends talk at 7 p.m. Featuring Patricia Welch, and she will be talking about the history of alcohol in China. So if you have time, please do join us. Same place over here. As well, a first in the Body and Spirit lecture series, Religion and the Human Body, an inter-religion panel discussion comprising representatives from Buddhist, Catholic, and Islamic faiths. This panel will be moderated by the exhibition curators, Nora and Conan, and it's as well held here at the auditorium this Saturday, 25th of February, 3 to 4:30 p.m. So we hope you find some time to join us. And thank you so much for coming here this evening, and we wish you a lovely rest of your Thursday.